Well, tēnā koutou katoa, talo falava, and welcome to the final Equalise panel today, perfectly named the Equity Fight. Achieving equity, financial or otherwise, requires tenacity and skill. From pay parity to representation at the board table or in the sporting CEO's office, victories remain hard won. It's my pleasure today to introduce on stage three exceptional mana wahine who have walked the talk. To my left is Raelene Castle, the CEO of Sport New Zealand and the first woman in this role. At 36, Raelene was the CEO of Netball New Zealand, before moving across the Tasman to be the first CEO of an NRL club, the Canterbury Bulldogs, and then went on to become the CEO of Rugby Australia. Raelene Castle.
Yeah, fantastic.
On Raelene's left is Mai Chen. New Zealand and Harvard qualified. Mai is a barrister and holds an office in the Public Law Toolbox Chambers. Mai is a prominent and change-maker lawyer. She is the chair of the Super Diversity Institute of Law and was the inaugural chair of Global Women. Ladies and gentlemen, Mai Chen. And completing this powerhouse panel today is Becca Roux, who is the Executive Director of the US Women's National Soccer Team Players Association. Bit of a mouthful, but worth all those words in there. And Becca has been instrumental in the landmark 2022 Equal Pay Agreement for the US Women's Soccer Team. Becca Roux. Well, welcome, ladies, and welcome to Equalise. I'm going to take us back to the beginning, and I'd just be interested to first know a little bit about your upbringing and how that's influenced you to fight for change. Raelene.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, significantly, and it's my mum sitting in the front row, so I can't tell any fibs about my upbringing. But yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was I've got a younger brother, and mum and dad treated us exactly the same, and that was really important. We both had to learn how to do the washing. We both had to learn how to change a car tyre. We both had to learn to use our hammer, and it was completely equal opportunity. We also had a sort of a no blood, no sympathy rule. So, it was like, built resilience, right? Because you actually had to, you fell over, you got up, you got on with it, and that's kind of the way we were brought up. So I'm ever grateful for the opportunities mum and dad gave me to open, create that belief that girls could do anything.
Mai, talk to us about your upbringing, coming to New Zealand as a 6.5-year-old. How's that influenced your life and who you are as a person?
Well, I'd be a perfectly normal person, except for the fact that I'm the youngest of 4 girls. I was born in a Chinese family, and Dad didn't think it was such a good thing, actually. He was pretty desperate for a boy. We arrived in New Zealand because my father was an Olympics gymnastics coach, so he came to train the New Zealand team. But you see, we were all raised as athletes. He threw me in the pool at 3, walked me up and down before I drowned. That's how I learnt to swim. We did front somersaults on the lawn. I thought all kids did this on a Sunday afternoon. But actually, when I wanted to be a professional athlete, he didn't want me to be an athlete. He said, people look down on us. We are immigrants, and you are a girl. That wasn't a good thing when he said that. And so you need to get a profession to be respected. And I must say, coming to the country was hard. We were the first Taiwanese family in the South Island. And what I discovered was that New Zealanders really didn't know a lot about people from distant lands. And so you are constantly underestimated. People presume you can't speak English. And you're never the candidate from Casting Central. I found it pretty exhausting to be me, actually, Sarah.
Do you still find it exhausting?
I actually thought that when I got old, like I am now, that it would be really easy. When I was younger, I had mentors. One of them was the Right Honourable Professor Sir Geoffrey Palmer. He was my law partner. And he said to me, nah, this isn't discrimination, mate. It's just because you're young. Well, guess what, Geoffrey? I'm not young anymore. And it is still happening. So the reality is that, as you know, Asians look very young. And so somebody was very kind to me the other day and said, oh, there's an age limit on this, and are you older than 40? Sometimes people offer me a student discount, and I'm thinking, okay, well, that was a long time ago, last century. But the reality is that the bamboo ceiling is still there. And it's tough being a woman, but it's tough being a coloured woman. And so that aspect of always being underestimated, of people never taking you seriously, despite the fact that you've been at it 30 plus years and you're top of your profession, is tiring. But what that means is that we need to be nicer to each other and we need to be nicer to ourselves.
Awesome. Hear, hear. Well, we'll dig a bit deeper into that shortly, Mai, but across to you, Becca. Growing up in the United States, how did your upbringing influence to you to be such a change maker in your field?
I think it goes back to your parents and upbringing. I'm fortunate to have both my mom and dad sitting in the back row. They didn't opt for the front row, they opted for the back row. But my dad was a great athlete. He was a swimmer and water polo player at Stanford. And then my mom was on the very first Stanford women's soccer team and Stanford women's water polo team, and truly a product of Title IX. And I think I look at people like my mom and other foremothers who didn't have the opportunity to really play organized sport growing up, but I did. You know, I'm a beneficiary of that next generation. And so I'm the oldest of four, not the baby, but the oldest, very much the oldest. 3 girls and 1 boy. And we all say my brother has 4 mothers, but he's survived. But we were given every opportunity that we ever wanted to try. And I think I'm very fortunate that was my reality. And I understand, especially as a white woman, like so much privilege comes along with that. And I look back and go, that is what molded me. I grew up in a very closed-minded place called Midland, Texas, and it was only because my parents continued to tell me, no, there's a much broader world out there. Do not accept this as okay. Kudos to good parents.
Yeah. Raelene, throughout your career, you've held these amazing positions of leadership. What do you think your biggest leadership lesson is, and how did you learn it?
I think the biggest thing is that 2 things. One is that you have to learn that life's not black and white. So leadership isn't about always right and wrong. The situation isn't always laid out to you in a way that seems obvious, the answer. So you have to find the compromise, find the place where the grey can work for more people. And I think when you're young and enthusiastic, sometimes black and white seems like an easy answer, but when you get into leadership roles and you recognise that you're dealing with a wider sector of people, and diversity and inclusion, a really important part of that, the grey is important, and to work your way through that. That's probably the first thing. Second thing, best piece of advice I got from my own mentor, who had said to me, I've watched you and observed you working in a leadership environment, and there's no doubt that you have a capability to build a team and people will follow you. But he said, just don't get too close so you can't kick their ass. So in leadership, you have to ultimately make the tough decisions, and sometimes those are not popular, and sometimes you have to be able to make the hard decision for the betterment of the organisation as opposed to the betterment of yourself or the person that might be your really good friend. But ultimately, you do have to have the capability to make those tough decisions. So those are 2 things I try and take with me every day.
And you learn that over time, not overnight.
Well, you do, and you learn it by the mistakes that you make, by that, you realise that you could have handled a situation better, or you look back and you think, in that particular situation, if I had my time again, I would do things differently. But equally, having a mentor to help work through that situation, I think, is really important. Having somebody who is outside of your, current environment, that you can go to seek advice, that's not your boss necessarily, that you can help guide you through those difficult situations, is something that I would absolutely advise.
And for the young women that are here today, how old were you when you sought out a mentor, just for their knowledge?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was fortunate probably to have right from in my very first role when I first started working at 21 and when I graduated, and those mentors have been people that have dipped in and out of my life, and I've found really good advice throughout that time. I have someone now who has been with me for sort of 15 years, I suppose. He would be my normal go-to now, but different people, different times, different requirements. Important that you can be flexible about that.
Mai, let's move to you in terms of your biggest lesson as a leader in the legal profession in New Zealand, but as a leader for the Asian community and Asian women, what do you think your biggest lesson is, and how have you learnt it?
I think the most important thing is that you need to be clear about your why. What are you doing and why are you doing it? Because you need to be your own little cheerleader team. Because often when you want to do something and you know it's the right thing to do, everyone else thinks you're mad and they don't want to come with you. And actually what I've discovered is that it doesn't matter if you're a serial entrepreneur and you're always successful. Every time you want to do something new, there is something called the status quo bias. People don't want to change. And so you have to start the process all over again until everyone's on board. And as you know, failure is an orphan. Success has many, many subscribers. So what I find is that once it's established and it's very popular, then you get global women. But when you are the inaugural chair, a lot of the women who are now members said, well, why would I want to join another women's group? So it is always the way that you need to learn to encourage yourself. And you need to be clear about why you're doing it, because if you're not, it's just too hard. And so you'll give up. And the pathway to success is never straightforward. You need to bring other people with you. You need to get other people to support you. But when the chips are down and no one will support you, you still have to be able to keep going. So it is very important to tell the difference between people who are all hooey and no doey. And those people will make you come a cropper if you're not careful. So you need to have a pretty good BS barometer and to figure out who will actually help you bake the bread. Not who will help you eat the bread, the little red hen, but who will help you bake it. I always remember that Dame Patsy Reddy was one of the first people who helped us with Global Women, and she was very kind to me. She said, Mai, your greatest gift, which is probably a way of saying that I wasn't super talented in that particular area myself, was that I was very good at building a team around me. I'm good at figuring out who could help me in building a team, as Raelene says, because otherwise you can't do it. You can't do it yourself.
So what's your why, Mai?
Sorry?
So what's your why?
Oh, what I think is this. A lot of people wander around saying, oh, I don't know what I should be doing. Yes, you do. It comes to you. It comes to you and it means something to you and it resonates. Look, I didn't ask to be born the youngest of 4 girls in a Chinese family that then immigrated to a country where there was no one else in the city that I lived in that spoke our language. But anyway, that happens to be the way it was. And as much as I would wish that I was tall and white and male and a former Prime Minister, because I suspected that his life was easier than mine, but when I started being his law partner, it was totally confirmed for me. And so what would happen is when people would open doors for him, I'd just kind of slide through, right behind him. And so my why is that I haven't enjoyed being discriminated against in this world. All I've ever wanted is to be treated equally on the basis of merit, on the basis of my character. All I've ever wanted, Sarah, is to be proud of who I am and not to think that by dint of birth I'm handicapped, because I'm a woman and because I'm a woman of colour and I'm an immigrant and I come from a distant culture. These should not be matters of discrimination. The cultural capability that is fundamental to surviving in Tamaki Makaurau, where half the population are Māori, Pacifica and Asian, should be something that is sought after and valued, not just IQ, not just EQ, but CQ. If you don't have the ability to work with everybody in New Zealand, then how can you represent this country and how can you properly serve everyone in this country?
Becca, I'm going to come to you. What's your why, and why do you advocate so strongly for these US women football players?
I think my why has always been I want to have impact in what I'm doing, so that if you have to know what's driving you. Money has never been my great motivator, to maybe some of my sisters' chagrin, but it is, am I actually having impact and making a difference? And I agree completely with May. It comes to you. So I was a consultant at McKinsey, and I grew up a huge fan of the U.S. Women's National Team. And suddenly I was being asked to join a call after they had just won the 2015 World Cup, where I had attended the final last minute, because they were starting to talk about equal pay and equal working conditions. And at first you maybe don't know how you can be helpful, but if you kind of just, I always just had to have a reminder of what I was doing, because it was really hard. I was 31 when I first started working with them, and very naive, and I was like, oh yeah, let me just walk in, show all of these mostly men, but also some women, facts about that demonstrate their own bias about the commercial viability of this team and some others. I also believe equality is a fundamental right, and so this was just more fuel to the fire, as to give rationales to why they deserved already equal pay and equal working conditions. And thought, great, we can get this done in a year. It took 7. I feel like I've aged a lot, May, in the last 7 years. So, and it was both hard externally, but also internally. Anytime you're trying to have change, I think you said it earlier, you have to be resilient. You have to do all of these things that people don't ever see. And if you don't hold on to why you're doing it, there were many a moment, full transparency, I was tired and ready to walk. But I knew I cared so much about this that and you could see some daylight. Like every once in a while, it could be a very dark day, and you just kind of have to keep going.
A lot's been made of the pay equity deal within this agreement, but in preparation for this panel, I discovered more about the commercial arm of what the agreement allows for, in terms of increasing the value and the visibility of the team. Can you explain a little bit about that, because I think it's really important to this agreement?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear some other thoughts from the panelists up here, but you look at equality as like there's a fundamental right. And so if you want to say for equal working conditions, I think there is just absolutely no argument against equal working conditions, regardless of your gender in sport, period, the end. If you want to start to bring in some sort of meritocracy, where revenue is the output that you're using to measure how much somebody then gets paid, well, then I'm going to say, what are the inputs? So if the inputs aren't equal to what the inputs are for the men, then how are we even measuring apples to apples for the same output that is revenue? And so really it has to start with investment. And so with this agreement, we aligned a lot of incentives for U.S. soccer, for our players, for the men's players, such that we are all kind of rowing in the same direction. I did crew in college, so I'm going to use a rowing reference, but such that we are, I think, taking full advantage of the commercial opportunities, both helping U.S. Soccer as the federation do that. We as a players union, we also have a lot of commercial activity, and some of that was born out of the men saying, oh, but you're not worth as much. Really, let me just show you how many followers Alex Morgan has compared to anybody else on the men's team. If you want like very, very basic metrics, you're missing the plot here, and you're leaving value on the table, and that is not the player's fault, that's your fault. That was probably something I said verbatim at the table.
Raelene, do you have a comment on the agreement in terms of a New Zealand perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I do, and I have hats off to the work that you've done. I think one of the things that's really important is that we don't get out of sequence. So the actual baseline support of making sure that the female athletes start with being the best self that they can be. So the coaching, the nutrition, the strength and conditioning to be the best athletes that they can be is a really important start point. Because if you go from suddenly the pay equity piece here and you actually haven't got equity in product, you actually overlay a really really significant challenge. We have some codes in this country that are making some significantly positive steps to make sure that we start building the base. And if I take the Football Ferns as a really good example in this tournament, what we've done is invest in the opportunity for those athletes to grow and develop. We've brought back some international players, and now we've created an amazing product which has been represented on the world stage, on the New Zealand stage and the world stage, and now the commerciality starts to grow. We know the phone's been ringing, we know those athletes are now opening up opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have opened. And so that balance of making sure you don't set the female athletes up to fail is also a really important part of the conversation. We also have athletes that still want to balance a home life and have some time at home and actually be able to engage in that way and not just go straight into a professional environment because their own environments aren't ready yet. So making sure you're working and supporting a growth opportunity in a way that the cohort and the athletes are available is a really important part of that process.
And
I agree with that, by the way. That's why I started with working conditions. It's the investment. Like, you actually have to create the product and create the opportunity for women and girls to have the chance to play. And commercial viability is somewhat of an output, but you almost have to overinvest because there's been such an underinvestment. And that's where I go back to the revenues and output. What were the inputs, and how are you making up for likely the very large gap that's existed for a long time?
As long as the balance sheet can sustain it, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
You can't give someone something if you haven't got it in the first place.
Agreed.
So
There's a sustainability viability part. Sure.
and your female athletes were the stars.
Yeah.
Like they won the World Cup, not the men, right?
Yeah,
So
but
you had this conversation.
That's why this event is just so important, because it's righting the wrongs of the way people see sport. Mm-hmm. Hey, this is professional. You think that women can't attract a crowd? Think again. I think that it also goes both ways. Some women athletes want to have some work-life balance. Actually, some male athletes should also get some work-life balance. I just think that this event has been incredibly important for getting sport into the place that it should be. It's not a hobby. It's not something that people should be doing. They shouldn't be working in a cafe to support themselves to do this. This is an important part of our society, and it should be treated professionally and equally.
And we've also had complete parity in our Olympic athletes and our Olympic investment, male and female, for 20 years, as long as high performance sport. So I get slightly frustrated because we only have the conversation about the missed opportunity in the male codes and the female codes. Actually, we have many sports where the females are the hero and they get rewarded appropriately.
I think the visibility leads to value. And likewise. And just yesterday, Sport New Zealand released the media analysis study, which saw that actually we've gone up significantly from 8% of all media coverage of women and girls in sport to yesterday 28%.
Yeah,
you must be proud of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
So you can turn these things around. If you leverage off events like this, you just need to build, converge. You've got the great people to do it here.
But as we've touched on in this session, change can be really... some people can walk to a change. Some people love it, but there's also a lot of resistance to change. Becca, what's your advice to people, the younger generation or anyone wanting to make change? What does that person need to keep doing?
You have to bring people along with you, and it's not always easy, but people are always resistant to change in very small ways in your own lives. So when you're talking about some sort of seismic change that maybe is trying to change all of society, like some of our players are trying to do, you're going to have a lot of resistance. And so as you bring people along, if they're not coming along with, then you have to find the other leverage points. And for us, that was, we need to get a new president of U.S. Soccer then. So how do we help impact the elections? And it really is like finding all of those different ways that you can have an impact where you know what the end goal is. We had to have Cindy Parlow-Cone, a former player, to be the president in order for this agreement to happen. And that is also a little bit of luck. Like, I can't say that there was just a master stroke that we knew exactly what we were doing at every moment. We also made mistakes. So it is, though, finding those champions, those people that you can rely on that are in every corner. It's like you really have to take an ecosystem approach and go, all right, who is where and how are we all, what is the goal we're all driving towards and how are we working to get there? And you're not always going to agree along the way, but if you can work towards something that's broader and find that buy-in, you make progress slowly.
In New Zealand, we have a sort of bit of saying about getting people on the waka.
Yeah.
And then pedaling in the right direction is also really helpful as well. Raelene, in terms of being a change maker, influencing change, what's your advice to other, aspirational change makers out there?
I agree with Rebecca. Getting people on the walker is important, making sure that you're going in the right direction. But I also think sometimes if you're determined to be the person that creates the change, sometimes you're not the person to see it through to the next phase. So sometimes you have to really ruffle the feathers, create the storm, be the activist that actually creates the change. And then you need to step aside and let those people that come in that can calm the waters and be the person going forward as well. So if you really believe in something, you've got to fight for it, but actually recognise sometimes when you do actually get there, that's the time to move aside and let people get on with it.
Mai, for you and the work that you've done creating change in so many different areas, what's your advice?
Well, what Raelene said about being unpopular is really important for the women in this room because we were raised to be pleasant, polite, and agreeable. And that's the stereotype that we are supposed to satisfy. Well, the difficulty is if you want to make change, you are not going to satisfy that stereotype and you will be unpopular. Can you cope with that? And secondly, you will face opposition. There is a status quo bias. There will be people in your way. And thirdly, when that happens, will you say to yourself, oh, it's not the right time? Well, let me tell you, it's never the right time. It is never the right time for change because they have the power and they don't want to give it up. So they're not going to like what you do. So don't judge your success or the rightness of your actions on the basis of how some people respond. Think about only take feedback from those you really respect. And finally, having said that though, there is a time and a tide in human affairs. Sometimes the tide's out. When I go fishing, if it's low tide, well, we're not fishing, are we? It's got to be high tide. And sometimes when the tide's out, it's out. When it's in, it's in. But when it's in, you have to recognise it's in and you have to fish like crazy because some people say to me, it's not perfect. Raelene says it's not black and white. It's never perfect. My favourite motto is this. You do what you can, and then you die. So some people say, oh, I'm not sure, should I? I just say, oh, for heaven's sake, do something, because you're going to die. And they say, well, I'm not sure. Well, I say, if you do it and you don't like it, then you'll know, won't you?
Okay, and finally to finish, we're just going to have a little quick fire down the line, and I'm going to get you to complete this sentence. Okay. The legacy of the FIFA Women's World Cup 2023 is?
More people being physically active.
A watershed for taking women's sport seriously.
Greater global interest in women's football.
The legacy of the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2027 will be?
Well, I think pay parity.
Woo! Let's give that a round of applause.
I agree.
Same. That was...
I didn't steal yours, did I?
Well, CNN reported at the start of the tournament that on average players will earn 25 cents for every dollar earned by the men at the World Cup last year. And that's data from the FIFA prize money and FIFPro, the Global Players Union. But it's an improvement from 2019 when this was less than 8 cents per dollar. So we've already achieved so much in this equity fight, but we have a lot to go.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's just been so fitting to have these wahine toa to complete our Equalise session today. I've learned a lot, and I just want to acknowledge you for the mahi, the work that you're doing in each of your areas, but also the mahi that you're doing that you inspire other people to do. Because I think that's so powerful, and the impact of your actions, you'll probably never know, but I hope you appreciate the love from all of us to you. Can we please acknowledge Raelene Castle, Mai Chen and Becca Roux.